Hi, my name is Erica T. Worth, and I'm the author of White Horse that's out with Flatiron Macmillan November 1st, and it's an Indigenous literary horror novel. It's about Carrie, who despises her mother because she thinks she abandoned her when she was 2 days old. And she loves heavy metal and she loves horror. Those are the things she loves. But when her cousin Debbie gives her an old bracelet of her mother's, Carrie's like, yeah, thanks, and basically tosses it aside. And but when she touches it, her mother starts haunting her, the ghost of her mother, and this monster begins to invade her dreams. And so Carrie decides that she guesses she should find out what happened to her mother after all. And one of the bits of inspiration for this novel was had to do with my grandmother, as I had been told all of my life that my grandmother had suicided. But when a cop looked at the death certificate for my mother, he said to her that it sort of looked like it had been doctored, and the family came to wonder if her husband had murdered her. And so that controversy has never been resolved. And I think in some ways the tension between those two potential very, very different facts in some ways kind of like stayed inside my brain and erupted into this novel.
Before we begin, we ask if there's anything you or if Cina doesn't want to talk about, we will not cover it. And this isn't live, so if at any point there's something that anyone said that you or Cina or Brendan or myself are uncomfortable with airing, let me know. I never ask questions. It'll be cut.
I don't want any mention of the Bermuda Triangle. Fuck that place.
Bastard.
That's half my questions.
May as well not even do this now.
Yeah, forget it. Sorry, guys.
Hey, it's Well Red Beard. I appreciate you being here. I'm back full time on my channel. I would love for you to come over and subscribe. Just search Well Red Beard on YouTube. I delve deep into horror. I've spent the last 3 years reading a ton of independent small press horror. There's treasure to be found there, and I go out there and find it for you. I'm not afraid to tell you the books that aren't great while telling you the books that are great. I don't break hearts or hurt feelings, but if a book doesn't work for me, I will tell you that, and I'll tell you why. I'm on a new mission now to go back and dig into some great horror from the 80s and 90s. I'm working my way through Robert McCammon's books. I'm going to look at all of Peter Straub's work. I'm going to do Brian Keene. I've got aspirations to go back and do J.F. Gonzalez, a lot of the greats, so you have a good idea of where to start. I have a video up for J.F. Gonzalez's Survivor, so you can see what all the fuss is about. I recently read Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, so you can see what all the fuss is about. I just want you to come over and subscribe. I'm trying to grow the thing. I appreciate you taking a look at it. This is Well Red Beard. I hope you're enjoying all your books as much as I am. If not, you're reading the wrong damn books.
Welcome to Dead Headspace. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, here always with my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hello, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
We're really excited because we have a first-time guest host. She's been on the show quite a few times. Cina Pelayo, say hello.
Hello, everyone.
And we can dive into your books at some point, too. We Have to Pimp Children of Chicago in the upcoming sequel. And, of course, the guest today, Grady Hendrix. Welcome aboard. How are you?
Good. Well, I'm okay. I've been trying to get a new book started in like last week and this week. And, there's just so much crap you have to do. And so it's been a little, I probably seem a little discombobulated. So I apologize.
You have a lot going on, so it's fine.
Yeah.
We'll dive into the baseline question then. Cina or Brendan, jump in, please, at any point. But Grady, I got to know, especially the person that wrote Paperbacks from Hell, what got you into horror?
Well, I mean, I don't know, what gets anyone into anywhere? Like, it just kind of creeps up on you, like my horror as a kid, I wasn't a horror reader. I read King, I read Clive Barker, but they were kind of in the atmosphere. I watched horror movies with my friends, but I think everyone does that. I didn't really start reading horror or really looking at it until like university and later. And I was writing a bunch of different stuff, but it was the horror stuff that seemed to be clicking with people. And when I started really buckling down and writing, it was like 2009 or 10, and there just wasn't a ton out there. Horror was a pretty, Barnes and Noble had gotten rid of its horror sections. There just wasn't a ton, and so it felt like it was kind of wide open. So I was an opportunist.
That's great. And just a tag on to that question. Ronald Kelly reached out to me right before the show, and he said, when I told him I'm having Cina on and Grady, he loves you both, but he wanted to specifically ask you, Grady. He said, "What a wonderful show. Please thank him for me for making Zebra Books respectable again, because that's a huge deal for Ron, because he felt, you might know, you might not know, listeners might not know, he felt that people forgot about him, and you're a huge direct response. You're responsible for helping the wave of everyone kind of remembering that you gotta look back to who came before you. So
Yeah.
if anything to touch on that.
Yeah, well, Zebra is weird. I mean, it's funny. It's because I feel like sometimes Zebra just acquired stuff that was like maybe just horror adjacent.
Yeah.
And and then would like, but especially towards the end, and then would like publish it as horror. Like I've read stuff from Zebra that like, it feels like a thriller. I just feel like they really they were really doing all kinds of stuff. But I also will always give Zebra credit for, oh God, and I'm forgetting her name right now. Rebecca Grossman, who was one of their co-founders and editors, who I think was the first female editor-in-chief. I'm not 100% sure, but she might have been. But she was, by all accounts, not a well-loved person, but man, she got it done. I mean, she and Walter Zacharias, they really forged that company out of a slush pile and a couple of bucks and turned it into a real player. So I've always wanted to see like a version of Mad Men set in the 80s publishing world at a company like Zebra.
Damn, that's a good idea. Cina, please jump in.
Are you still? I know you're continually collecting paperbacks, like horror paperbacks. Is there like a horror paperback that you haven't been able to get your hands on that you're just like, where is this copy?
No, I mean, like they
No.
keep piling up. Those are boxes of them behind me. But no, there's not like one I'm looking for. It's kind of more fun to just stumble across them in the wild. I was just down in Winston-Salem doing a show at the Bookmarks Festival, doing the Paperbacks from Hell show, actually. And a guy I know who lives down there is a collector who actually moved from Long Island to Winston-Salem, or actually he lives outside Charlotte, to have more room for his collection, to like live in a house,
Nice.
a bigger house. But he collects like original art and paperbacks. And man, some of the stuff he had in there was just like so unknown to me. It was really just stellar. So I kind of like that there's still stuff I haven't seen, and stumbling across it. And the thing that's happened now though is in a lot of paperback thrift stores, you get the same problem you got in the mid 2000s in clothing thrift stores, where like suddenly everything's from the late 90s, and it's like the least interesting era. Like the 70s and 80s stuff is gone, early 90s is thinning out, and you're left with a lot of Kuntz and King and John Saul and then a bunch of like sexy vampire books from the late 90s.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah, I know
100%
what you mean.
describing the used bookstore down the street from me. Just John Saul Central with the occasional King thrown in there.
Yeah. Well,
Grady,
and it's funny too, right? Like it's one of those, I always find it as cautionary tale, like nothing against Dean Koontz, and nothing against John Saul. I mean, John Saul, I think his life is more amazing than his books to a large extent. But like, but you look at someone like Stephen King, who, whatever you want to say about him, man, he really puts it out there every time, right? He's like, I don't think King phones it in. I think he like really, really genuinely goes for it with every book and really tries to get some blood on the page. And then you look at like, you know, Dean Koontz, who I'm not quite sure has that level of sweat. And you're like, and yet here they are on the same shelves, like piled up next to each other.
Grady, I'm
Definitely.
wondering if you've ever met these two gentlemen. On my, I guess would be my left, the red shirt is Mark Saylor. On the right is Jim Marshall.
No.
They're usually at, well, they were usually at Scares That Care. They carry a lot of those older books and, you know, Shizmar and Keenan and all them. But Jim is, you want to talk about a guy that's super knowledgeable about older books from the 20s and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, I had long conversations with him about how, mostly him talking how GIs in World War II would rip out pages of their books and pass it along because they only had so many, you know, reading material in between slow periods. And I guess GIs from World War II were huge into Lovecraft. It's just one random fact that of a lot that he knew. And guys like Brian Keene, Tom Montoli, Jonathan Jans, those guys would go to Jim to see this bed at the hotel at Scares That Care to see all these super old unknown books. And it just seems like Jim would kind of be the bridge to, honestly, you, because seriously, for the paperbacks from hell and your expansive knowledge on this stuff, you two would get along pretty well. But yeah, that's all I got to say about that.
No, I've never met him. And that's, you know, it's funny, like the last 2 years have been sort of like, I think I would have met a lot more people with like Nikon hadn't gone away and like live events hadn't gone away. So yeah, I always feel like I'm kind of faking it. But that Lovecraft thing is interesting. And that happened with a lot of other books where, and I'm not going to get my facts right, but you know, the military provided a library to GIs, and I've heard that a Lovecraft collection made it into there, but sort of accounted for his popularity, you know, after the war.
Well, you got to figure you got guys that are dealing with not knowing when they're gonna possibly get killed, see who's gonna get, you know, who's gonna die. You see terrible things, so I'm sure let's read about aliens that will take our mind off of this brutality.
Well, I also think, you know, I think one thing that gets underrated or underestimated is that horror's not boring. Like, you know what I mean? So I feel like if I was a GI, like, and it's like, oh, here are a lot of books I can pick from, and there's a little Faulkner and a little this and a little that. Oh, and this one's horror. I'll go for that. Like, it's just like more fun.
Absolutely. Brendan, sorry, Cina, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say quickly. I know, like, you've said that multiple times, Grady, like in interviews, and I've heard you talk about it. That's why many of us love horror, because it encompasses so much. It's such a wide range as opposed to other genres that may be more formulaic. And I understand some people want that comfort of going into a specific genre and having that formula. But like in horror, you can have something that's completely unexpected, like leprechauns, or you know, or just something, you know, or gothic. You know, our gothic storyline. So that is, I think, what's why it's open to so many.
Yeah, and also like, yeah, it encompasses. I mean, horror, I think, is like, it comes so close to YA in the sense that, is it really a genre? Like, you know what I mean? It's like YA is like, that's a marketing term. Like, you can have YA romance, you can have YA super, YA real, like it encompasses so much that the label YA almost doesn't have a lot of meaning anymore. And I feel like that's almost the case with horror when you're looking at a genre that I think plausibly includes everything from Rebecca to Toni Morrison's Beloved to H.P. Lovecraft to Stephen Graham Jones. Like, I mean, it's like, is that a helpful genre label? It's too big.
I agree, and I feel like we're there. Like, we're there.
Yeah.
It's just so wide ranging that just to not, I don't want to use the word dismiss, but some people might still dismiss it as just horror, but it's just so wide ranging. There's genres and subgenres within the category, so it's
and I feel like, and that's really helpful, I think, for fans. I mean, there are people who really want zombie erotica, period. That's all they're interested in. Yeah, exactly. So thank God
go for it.
Thank God there's meta tags. You know? Thank God there's indie books.
Yeah.
Brennan, I'm interested to hear where you were going to pick up.
Oh, I actually wanted to jump back to something you said a little bit ago, Grady. You mentioned, that horror essentially crept up on you, snuck into your life, and that at the time when you were starting to find that your more popular stuff that you were writing fit into that genre, that bookstores weren't really carrying it and it wasn't as widely available as it might be now. Is that kind of what led into your kind of deep dive into the older paperbacks, is just the fact that there just wasn't a lot out?
My incredible ignorance about, yeah, no, totally. Like there was also, I think there was a thing in the probably in the 2000s, really, where a lot of stuff that would be published as horror now was getting published as literary fiction, just because the horror marketing label was so dead. God, was it Lives of the Monster Dogs? I don't know if y'all remember that, or Gargoyle. Like, I think yeah, like those were books that were pretty clearly horror, but they were definitely not, they were published as literary fiction because they had a little style to them. And, they had some like structural fun, but like, and people were just like, well, why would I market it as horror? That's like saying I'm marketing it as a big pile of shit. So, I think that was going on. But yeah, no, there wasn't a lot on the shelves, and I really love paperback swap shops anyways. And I was just seeing these huge horror aisles where I was completely unfamiliar with 80% of it. You know what I mean? And it was like, I just started randomly reading. And it's funny, I'm a big fan of Elizabeth Engstrom, who published When Darkness Loves Us and Black Ambrosia. But one of the reasons her work hit me the way it did is when I was reading for Paperbacks from Hell, I think I had just read like 7 or 8 books that were just struggles. And so then I got to someone who actually was like invested. And so it was just like a light switch going on. So like I really worried when Valancourt, I helped them republish When Darkness Loves Us. I was like, maybe I was overrating this because like, I was just like coming off of a dry spell, but then seeing how people responded to it, thank God. Maybe they're all coming off dry spells too.
Brennan.
Oh, Cina, go ahead.
Sorry, Cina.
I was thinking, since we're talking about that, and a lot of people keep throwing the words around that we're in another horror renaissance. And then, we think back to like the period that you're talking about, like that 24-year period, like at the end of the 70s to like through. Do you think something similar is happening right now with horror? Or do you think that time just can't be replicated because it was such a different period?
Well, also, one of the problems is we've lost a lot of readers. I mean, when you look at like 1988, say, when like, and I'm guessing here, 88, maybe it was 84, but like when a mid-list author would be selling 125,000 copies in paperback, and you're kind of like, and now what's mid-list sell 30,000? Like, and it's like, we've lost a ton of readers. And so I feel like things aren't ever going to get that crazy again, because I think when there was a lot of money and a lot of like distribution channels that needed to be filled, I think editors maybe were a little less choosy and also a little more willing to go further afield because, okay, I'm going to try something crazy with this because maybe this will click. Maybe zombie erotica will click, and if it doesn't, I've got something else coming up, the following week, and so it won't be I can take more risks. Right. We can afford something. So I don't know. I don't think particularly that, but I do think one of the things that's happened is sort of the children of the 90s have come of age, and I think they're kind of the saviors of horror these days. Like the 90s really gets looked down on as sort of the era when horror died. And, a lot less horror movies got made. A lot of the franchises kind of went off a cliff. All the publishing lines, especially the paper ones, shut down. I mean, and horror really got tarred with the gore porn label in the early 90s that really stuck with it till now, I think. And still sticks with it to some extent. And horror, I think, did that. I think that was a self-inflicted wound. But kids growing up in the 90s, or even, not just kids, I mean, like, kids who are in college stuff, they were watching the X-Files, and the
Right.
X-Files was, oh, horror can have women in it who are main characters. Horror can be funny, horror can be weird, horror can be Buffy. And then they got Buffy, which I think really pushed those guys. Horror can be romantic, horror can be, scary one minute and funny the next. And then, you got Scream, which really, I think, pushed things in a different direction. So I feel like, and then you got a whole lot more stuff towards the late 90s, but I just feel like horror really had stuff that expanded the boundaries in the 90s. And so kids who grew up with that expect more from it. They really
Yeah.
expect horror to do better.
I'll throw out Candyman too, because I
Yes.
feel like that was a massive one. And I know Cina loves it for the Chicago roots, but that
Oh,
the
of
Clive
course.
the Clive Barker movies, 80s to 90s,
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure for all of us, they were just game changers. And it's coming from someone who it's a gay British man who does this stuff that a lot of people that may be conservative, it might pull them in through the movies or even the books, and that kind of turns some heads, and it kind of has this domino effect.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and it's funny though, it's interesting because I think Clive Barker is one of those writers that he's sort of a different writer for everyone. Like, to me, Barker is the Books of Blood, Weave World, and then I kind of tap out. But I know for a lot of people, Great and Secret, Barker is Great and Secret Show and Imagica, and and the book, the Art trilogy, I think, or the Books of the Art. Like, for them, he's this dark fantasy guy who was and that was their Barker. It's the same with King a little bit with the Dark Tower series. I know for some people, King is the Dark Tower. I love
That's
Stephen King.
true.
I've read everything he's written except the Dark Tower books. But like, so it's like you look at this picture. Is it two black-faced women staring at each other, or one white goblet? Like, you know what I mean? It's just like how you're looking at it depends on the writer it is. So to me, 80s Barker is my Barker, but I know for a lot of people, 90s Barker is their Barker.
Yeah. And where do you want to see horror go?
Where it's going. I mean,
Damn, that's a good question.
Good, good. We're on the right track then. That's good.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, more of
Good.
this, please. Yeah. And the one thing I worried about briefly, and then I realized, A, it's never going to happen, and B, YA did just fine. But there was that real YA gold rush for a little while. I feel like when every agent was telling all their like adult authors, ooh, all the money's in YA, you should do something. And we got a lot of really uninspiring books, I think. And I sometimes worry that if like horror continues to be seen as this like hot new field, we're going to have that moment. At the same time, YA survived it just fine. You know what I mean?
That's
Like, I think
Yeah.
any genre, once it reaches a certain size, can survive some
Right.
mercantile-minded opportunists.
That was like what, 2010 to 2012. That was
Yeah.
a huge YA everything. And but yeah, it's still holding strong. YA
Yeah.
area.
And with horror, I mean, like, look at you. You got My Best Friend's Exorcist, Paul Tremblay's huge M. Night Shyamalan movie. And I threw this out there, and I'd like your take on it. And it wasn't for I can't talk. It wasn't for hyperbole, and it wasn't just for, hey, this is a hot take thing. But I think that the M. Night Shyamalan Tremblay team up could have a modernized parallel to Robert Bach's Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock. It could be that big because M. Night Shyamalan, when he's on fire, he's on fire.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think The Sixth Sense and Signs. I really love Signs, and
exactly.
And it's funny. The script for Signs is great. I actually think it's much better written than The Sixth Sense. It's just really, really good. But yeah, I mean, listen, who knows, right? Like, movies are so different from the books they're based on. Movies and books are such different beasts. But already that Knock at the Cabin Door trailer is like Shyamalan's most viewed trailer of all time. So You know, there
Dave
you go.
Dave Bautista is awesome too as an actor.
Yeah, although I can't figure out Dave Bautista's head. Like, it's so strange
You
and
talking about like
alien.
the
wrinkly,
geometrics and the lines?
yeah, it's like he's got like this science fiction head. I feel like
I did not
every time
expect
I
that.
see him, he's like a special effect.
Cina,
I
um,
so I have to ask this question because I want to start moving into wait, am I on mute? Oh, I'm not on mute. Okay.
Nope.
So my best friend's exorcism comes out on Prime, September 30th. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And so you wrote, it's a spiritual trilogy. Do you feel that way between my best friend's exorcism, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and How to Sell a Haunted House? Because they all feel they all take place in the same they all take place in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
Was that intentional? Or
Oh yeah. I mean,
okay.
Shit.
with Best Friend's Exorcism, it was a little bit different because I was kind of like, I gotta write about my high school experience. And after I had sort of an abortive first attempt to write it, it was just garbage. I was like, okay, I gotta do this. Like, it's gotta be something I really know. So I set it, you know, where I grew up and in my old high school, because I know that. And then I felt really bad about the parents in my best friend's exorcism, because they didn't, you know, everyone thought they were the bad guy, and that's because the story was told from the point of view of the kids, and your parents are the bad guys. And I was like, you know, but there's a different version of the story from the parents' point of view where they're not the bad guys. So Southern Book Club was sort of an attempt to write about adult friendship, which I think is really different from teenage friendship. And I think it runs colder, but it's a lot more important, I think. I mean, teenage friendship is important at the time, but I think adult friendship, those are going to be the friendships that get you through your kid getting cancer, your parents dying, you getting a divorce. Like, I mean, I'm not saying not serious stuff happens when you're a teenager, but those, like, the big stuff is like, and then when I was doing How to Sell a Haunted House, I really wanted to set it in that neighborhood again. And I realized I was writing a book basically about parents dying. And I was like, and sort of how a family continues after that. And also haunted puppets and dolls. Like, and how the hell does the family continue after that?
So fucking creepy, man.
And so in my head, they're very much all connected. And there's a little shout out to my best friend's exorcism and Southern Book Club. And there's a couple of small shout outs to Best Friend's Exorcism and Southern Book Club in How to Sell a Haunted House. But like, yeah, I mean, I can see someone reading them and being like, what? These have nothing to do with each other.
My best friend's exorcism, you would tackle, you know, the relationship of the best friends, and the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, you tackle, like, you know, adult relationships, you know, women that are grouped together in this dynamic. And then you have the brother and sister and How to Sell a Haunted House. And it is very emotional. This book is very emotional because it was very touching, because I think that many of us I almost feel like, and tell me if I'm wrong, because I know you were writing this during the pandemic, and I almost feel like you were saying, I understand what you all are going through. I'm going through it too, because it just felt like this acknowledgement that we were all mourning in a way.
Yeah.
And that's definitely what I felt like reading this book. Yeah.
Oh no, thanks. I mean, yeah, that's definitely there. I mean, it wasn't even me saying I understand what you're all going through. It was me saying, help, I'm going through this. Like, you know, I mean, I think one thing that hit a lot of people in the pandemic, or at least it hit me, was, you know, we all sort of had to contemplate our parents' mortality. And, you know, I had a relative, my Aunt Lee, who I really love a lot, who and my wife was very close. She was that, you know, sort of great aunt figure. You know, you're always closer to one older relative, right? And it was who my wife was closest to, and she was sort of the real heart and soul of our family. And you know, she was loud, she was outgoing, she didn't really give a damn, you know, and she was a fabulous person, and she died all alone, you know, in a hotel room.
So sad.
and the closest connection she had was a FaceTime call, and it's, and so I think between that, oh, thanks. Between that, I think that happened to a lot of people. Like, I'm not unique.
Yeah.
And I also, my parents, my dad, his health isn't great. And my mom has lung disease and had to really isolate. And in the middle of this, she got like a breast cancer diagnosis and really had a couple of like moments where her health really fell apart. And you sort of come face to face. I think a lot of people did in the pandemic with like, God, my mom is alone in a house hundreds and hundreds of miles away, and she's not safe. And you know what I mean? And what happens then? And I think, and I think that's, how do you keep a family going when your parents die? Like, it happens, but like, navigating those sibling relationships and, what traditions you keep, what you lose, whose house it's like that stuff's complicated. And I think everyone got kind of a look at that during the pandemic. So, I really appreciate you saying it, because I think that's what we all dealt with,
Yeah, that's and just like going through it, it's like you're dealing with the grief of losing your parents, and then a lot of us will be in this position where we're actually picking through their things and determining what stays, what goes. And that's almost like that adds on to the trauma. And so many people did this and they continue to do this. And I don't think we think about that, but many of us are going to be in that position one day, and it's difficult. And of course you have your endearing moments and throughout the book, and there, you have laughter, but it was very it was very emotional. And so thank you, because it made me think about a lot of things. So
no, I really appreciate it. Well, what I thought about a lot was, when I was down in South Carolina at my mom's house when she got really sick, she has these garbage bags full of fabric scraps in the garage that she's had for years. And she keeps saying she's going to make a quilt out of them. My mom has never made a quilt in her life. And somehow she's convinced, she's held on to these things forever. And like, I was like sitting there going, if she died, like, what the hell do I do with these things? Like, they mean something to her, but I don't want them. But like, I'm going to feel really weird putting these in the garbage. Like, and I've had to do that with a friend's house before, who was a big collector, and like helping his widow like sort of sort through the stuff with some other people. And it's like, it is really a weird experience. Like, people, and that's kind of what a certain variety of horror, haunted houses in particular, is about what people leave behind, right? Things, memories, trauma, ghosts, and how do you deal with this stuff? And I feel like horror always has these two options, right? You either like solve whatever problem it is that's holding this ghost here, or you finish its unfinished business and then it puffs away. And I'm like, I wish it was that easy. I wish I could take that bag of fabric out for a beer and be like, so what's your problem? And it'd be like, we're going to be a quilt. And then I'd turn it into a quilt and it would like poof and be gone. And instead, I'm going to have to take this fabric that my mom was emotionally invested in and stuff it in a garbage can with a bunch of like coffee grounds and put it out by the street.
I mean, and that in it of itself is a ghost. The way we think, we don't think about these things as ghosts. Like they're things, the memories, the decisions that the people that passed that they made that impact us. So those are ghosts.
Well, and it's funny. I'm reading a lot of ghost stories right now because I'm putting together the show I'm going to do for How to Sell a Haunted House when I sort of go out on the road to promote it next year. And there's this great one by Charlotte Riddell. I think I can't remember which one it is. But it's a ghost in this house and she's just annoying. And like, she just like bustles by people in the hall in a hurry and like jostles them really hard and like growls at them. And I'm like, I love the idea of just this crappy ghost that's always in a bad mood that just like, it doesn't yield. Like, cause that's the thing, like we're all like, I don't want a ghost to rip my face off. I don't want a ghost to like, scream and its hair to come across. But I'm like, what really annoys me is when people don't yield right on the sidewalk. Like, you go to the right, that's the side you drive on, and then you wind up in that stupid shuffle thing, and then they like bump into you and you're like, oh, excuse you. Like, so a ghost that does that is like after my own heart. It's a nightmare.
I love it.
That's a nightmare.
Cina, do you have the questions that you reposted in front of you at all? for Grady?
Which question? The
On
questions that from Twitter?
Yeah,
Oh God, Twitter questions. I love
Oh,
those.
they were pretty funny.
yeah. I well, the
There
first,
better
okay,
not
hold
be
on.
one about the Bermuda Triangle. I told you guys before this started.
God
cut
damn
it.
it, Brendan!
We'll
I
cut it.
told you to cut that out.
I will be sure. I will be sure to screen any questions. Okay, so um well, Chance, one of our one of our beloved booksellers, did want to know why horror authors are so hot. I don't know if that's appropriate, but we're um,
Well, I think we're all just clean living and pure hearts.
this is a really good question though from Finding
I
Montauk.
thought that was
Alex,
a good question.
I think that was a great question too. This one I was really excited about. Comes
Okay.
from Finding Montauk, Alex. He said the chapter titles in My Best Friend's Exorcism are 80s songs. What are your favorite songs?
In general or from the 80s?
He said just in general, what's his favorite? So I'm assuming maybe this sticks to the 80s since he referenced the 80s chapters.
Yeah. So I've got a lot. And I really I'm trying to think here. Okay, so my most embarrassing favorite 80s song is, and I'm gonna get the titles wrong because so many songs you're like, oh yeah, that's like this song, and actually it turns out like the title of the song is actually like a word you don't recognize and then a bunch of other words in like parentheses. But like what you got? Don't You Forget About Me is that song that always gets me. It's corny, it's cheesy, it's lame, but the Breakfast Club blew me away when I saw it when I was a kid, and that song just like takes me back. And this is going to be probably the moment where I seem like the biggest dope ever on the planet, but Bring the Noise by Public Enemy is a song I love so much. And one of my greatest concert going experiences was when I think they were on tour in 90 and they played the King Street Palace, which was like it was a pretty small venue in Charleston. And me and my girlfriend at the time, and she was super into hip hop and knew way more than I did. We went to see it, and like, it was the rowdiest, most fun I've almost ever had at a show. And it was the tour where, I'm gonna get this wrong, I think, but they lynch a Klansman at one point in it, and like the audience went crazy. And it was just such a great moment. But also, I heard a rumor that Will Smith on this tour would actually sometimes be on stage as like a backup dancer or like singer or part of the S1Ws or something. And I really hope that's true. Like, it totally sounds like an
That's
urban
very
legend.
cool.
And then my emo side, Tracy Chapman's Fast Car is a song I've always loved unreservedly. And going with that, I still like I Me Man, but I really loved her Till Tuesday Days. And Coming Up Close is like one of the saddest songs ever written, period, full stop. So I could go on. Debaser by the Pixies was a song I think I listened to just endlessly in high school. So yeah, I could go on and on all night long, but we don't have that much time here tonight.
Wait, I have to ask this last one. There was a lot of good questions, but this is a really good
Bring
question.
them. No, bring them all.
Okay.
I'll
So
give
this comes
faster answers so we can get them all in. Let's
No,
do
this
them.
is great. So I'm trying to read their like username correctly. So this is Yaika. She is a librarian. How many best friends have you exercised?
None, weirdly enough. You would think I'd get to do that more often, but
Yeah.
I rarely get. Although I will say, so I was at when I was doing my best friend's exorcism book stuff and getting out there on the road. I had done the horror store author events, and I knew they weren't for me. Like the sort of read from the book Q&A thing, it wasn't working for me. And so with my best friend's exorcism, I was trying this stunted version. I would get it right with Paperbacks from Hell, but like this stunted version of the shows I'd do later. But I had a Cardinals costume. I would dress. I mean, not the baseball team, but like the Catholic clergyman. And I did this shtick about the satanic panic and all this. And I remember doing this at a bookstore with like, I think there were like 13 people there. And there were these 4 really unhappy looking people. They're older than everyone else. And they started asking these really specific questions about exorcisms. And it turned out they were there because they had a family member who had fallen in with someone who said she was possessed by a demon and needed to be exorcised. And I mean, she was really having like a mental health crisis, and they thought they needed to arrange a safe exorcism for her to get this demon out of her. And I have rarely disappointed people as hard and as seriously as I disappointed these 4 people who came here because it was like the only thing they could find that said exorcism in it. And instead of getting actual useful information or help, they got this idiot doing this like monkey dance trying to sell his book. I really wish one of them had the wherewithal to smack me.
Oh my goodness. And she also asked, what horror films are you looking forward to watching this year?
Oh, well, the one I'm most looking forward to seeing is Barbarian, which I haven't seen yet because I'm an idiot.
And usually I'm the self-deprecating one here, Grady.
No, I wish I'd seen it
sir.
like a week ago. Dude, I didn't even see Nope until like 3 weeks ago. I'm just behind.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet. I got a little baby that I try to entertain when I'm not working.
Try to entertain when I'm not working. I just had this image of you doing like stand up on this sort of like King of Comedy basement stage, and the baby's just like ignoring you, and you're like, okay, got some baby jokes.
What's the deal with diapers?
The baby's like calling for the check. Wait, Cina, okay, let's do, I said I'd give shorter answers. Let's do them. Let's power through it.
All right. So David Wilson asks, is it true that every horror author has to write a rock and roll horror novel?
Yeah, so mine is We Sold Our Souls, and it's my lowest selling book of all time. It really almost wrecked my life writing that book. Not because it sold low, but just writing the book had a lot of drama. I love that book. I mean, you're not supposed to have favorites, but that's my personal favorite of my books.
Why?
And it also got me into metal, which I was not into before. And so like that is always good. But my agent said, he was looking at my sales numbers. He's like, well, every author wants to write a rock and roll book, and it's the job of every agent to stop them.
Really?
I mean, that's how George R.R. Martin ruined his career. I mean,
oh my God, yes.
Armageddon Rag.
That's it. Yeah.
He was coming off Fever Dream, and he was riding high, and he did Armageddon Rag, and it sold nothing. And he gave up. He couldn't get another book published, so he went into TV.
Yeah, that kind of worked out. Beauty and the Beast. Worked out.
Kim Stanley Robinson's the same thing. I can't remember what his rock and roll book was, but he said it really did not do well, and it took him a little while to get his legs back under him, publishing wise. Cina, do not write a rock and roll book.
I will not write a rock and roll book. I'm sitting here traumatized now. Like no rock and roll book. No.
I know.
So I think we actually covered all the Twitter questions.
Oh,
we did. That was pretty.
I got one more. It's just not. It's on a different page. So.
Oh wait,
okay.
I actually saw one that it's funny. It's about a horse.
Do you want me to read mine, or are you going to tell us the horse story?
I didn't want to interrupt it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, go ahead.
This one is from Brian McCauley. He is the author of Curse of the Reaper, which comes out on October 4th, I think it is. And Brian says, "Hey, Grady, each of your novels feels like a seamless mashup of a specific subculture with a specific horror subgenre. Was there ever a story you attempted to write where the concept just didn't gel and you had to put it aside?"
Oh yeah, and there's actually there's two. So there's a book I wrote, it got me the horror, it got my editor sort of talking to me about horror story because he liked my writing, but he hated the book. But it was sort of a revisionist haunted house thing. It was basically a family, a single dad moves into a house that turns out to be haunted, and like all his money's tied up in it. He can't move, and so he tells his kids like, just ignore everything, just ignore it all. And so they live in this house that's like all the blood's oozing out the vents, and like there's a portal to hell in the basement, and they just really, really try hard to just ignore all of it. And it never quite came together. But then the other one is there's a great Thai folk tale that's been adapted a ton of times. The most recent was there was a movie in the late 90s called Nang Nak. But it's a story about a guy in a village, and he's married and his wife's pregnant, and he gets drafted to go off to war. There's a couple of different variations on it. And he comes back years later, and his wife's kind of like living on the edge of town, and she's in poverty, and the kid's sick all the time, and everyone kind of shuns her. And he's like, what happened? She's like, I'm waiting for you. And everything's just gone bad. And he's like, oh, this is awful. And what you realize is she died after he left, and he's living with her ghost, and everyone who tries to sort of wake him up out of this fantasy that his family's still alive, she like gets rid of. And I tried to do a version of that set in like 1950s rural South Carolina, with sort of a Korean War thing. And it just never, it was too, it didn't have enough blood in it. It just wasn't working. It was a good idea. It had good moments, but there wasn't a heart to it. And I gave up after a while.
I never hear anyone else talk about the Korean War, and I'm obsessed with it. So please write that book. I'll be your number one fan for that book.
I have a question. What are you working on next?
So my next book is, it's set in 1970, and it's in a home for unwed mothers. And it's got sort of a childbirth thing, Rosemary's Baby thing to it. But I've been really obsessed with this topic for a long time. I have two aunts who were sent away to have their kids after they were both raped when they were teenagers. And it's something they never talked about until very late in their lives. And one of them actually met her son when she was in her 80s. And it was such a huge, great thing for her. And my other aunt never really knew what happened to her daughter. And I think it always haunted her a little bit. And I've always just been so, not obsessed, because that sounds like, I don't know, I'm obsessed with, the X-Files. But like, I've always been fascinated by how cruel that was. And there's like very little written about it. There's a couple of academic books, and there's one great book. It's a bunch of oral histories of women who got sent away, girls who got sent away. And I say girls because they were always referred to as girls. And some were, some of these were very, they were all young women, but some were in their early 20s, a lot were teenagers, some were 13. And I started reading this book just because I was really interested in sort of learning more about what happened to my aunts, who are both deceased now. And one of the women said, they always say we gave up our kids, we gave away our babies, and we didn't. They were taken. And it's just horrifying. I've been reading all of these like social worker manuals from the 70s and the 60s, and how you deal with unwed mothers and all this. And it's just, it's amazing. And I've read book after book after book and case studies and all this stuff written at the time about the problem and all this. And there is one line that encapsulates everything in one book. I've never seen it anywhere else. And there's contemporary studies that talk about this, but I'm talking about the books that were written in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s about how to deal with this problem. There's one line in one of these books that's for clergy if they're dealing with a member of their congregation who's having an illegitimate baby. And it's sort of like, here's the numbers you need to know, and the numbers of illegitimate births each year, and, just sort of the basic statistics you should know going into this. And at the bottom of this chapter, the last sentence, it says, we are not talking about, of course, there are two parties involved in every illegitimate pregnancy. However, we're not talking about the putative fathers. because there is no study, no research, and no numbers on them. Period, full stop. And so it's this problem that was pontificated about and written about. There were 200 maternity homes in America. There were 250,000 unwed, like illegitimate births every year. And no one ever talks about the father. It's all about the women. And it's so amazing to me that this completely natural, because I've gotten super into like birth right now while doing this, because I've been looking at a lot of obstetrics manuals and taking some online classes and stuff, because I am a childless middle-aged man. So why the hell am I writing a book about pregnancy? But like, and so it's like birth is like this incredible, amazing thing people go through and do, and it's so great. And here were all these millions and millions of women doing that, who were made to feel like they're doing the most natural thing in the world, and they've been made to feel like they've committed a crime against nature. And so so it's been really fun. You can tell I'm like really, that's where my head is now.
This is fascinating, because
yeah,
I've heard of these homes, and I have 2 children, so I remember birth. Like we birthed, my husband and I, we birthed at home, and we had a
Did you
doula,
really?
and it was well, we started at home, and like 30 hours into it, we were like, we gotta go to the hospital, and then we went to the hospital. But
for both of them, or just the first?
For both of them.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry. I'm just like super fascinated by people's pregnancy stories.
So I had a doula, and so it was just, it's not a midwife, it's just another woman that will come and just like take care of you, and like will get you food, and will take care of your husband, and it's just, she would just like keep us calm throughout it, and it was just such a wonderful experience to have another person there with us. And we can, if you want to chat more about it, I can tell you what it was like to have a doula.
I will drop you a line.
Yeah, drop me a line, because it was like, it made the entire experience just so wonderful. And so I couldn't imagine being in that very vulnerable state and then be made to feel shamed for it.
Yeah.
It was like,
months.
this was like a huge celebration. Yeah, exactly. So this was a huge celebration, and it was very like, there was just all this love, and I had a midwife. So then after I'm sure all the listeners are like, oh my God, I don't want to know about Cina's birth. But then we went to the hospital, and we birthed with a midwife. So it was all these women. It was just beautiful. So it was just
no, and also what's so amazing is how much obstetrics has changed. Like if you'd been doing that in 1970, you would have been unconscious. You would have been under general anesthesia for most of that process. Like, which I think is insane. I mean, I've been interviewing some people who worked obstetrics rounds, in the 70s and the 80s, and the way they did things is like, I mean, it's the kind of intense horror I wouldn't want to talk about on this podcast, because it's really, I mean, intense. What they did, and it's so nuts that the woman is almost considered, I mean, not now, but I mean was for so long considered sort of the least important part of the childbirth process.
What the fuck? Yeah, my wife's a social worker, and I'm sorry to cut you off.
Oh yeah.
No, this is great.
I was just gonna say, like, the stuff I have found out over the last 10 years, it is eye-opening.
Oh yeah. No, that must be amazing. Well, it's also, it's funny, right? There's so much stuff that we all sort of like, we all feel like we live roughly in the same world, right? But like your wife is a social worker. I'm sure when y'all are driving places, she's seen a very different landscape out the car windows than you are. You know what I mean? She, and I'm sure like midwives see things radically different than anyone else. It's just amazing that like people who deal with these different, very particular, intense parts of people's lives, just the world looks probably so different to them.
She is not fazed by much. I don't say this flippantly, but she, one of her jobs, she at one point pretty much saw people overdose every day, and I told her some weird stuff that I saw driving through Atlantic City, because that's where I work at a literal shit plant, so I see the underbelly of my county.
Wait, what do you work in?
I work at a wastewater treatment plant.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't think we need help manufacturing shit.
No. We have it's delivered by pipes. It's manufactured by human bodies. So
Wait, in Atlantic City?
that's where my plant is. But
So
everything's piped there.
I only been to Atlantic City once, and it was to go to this convention, and it was like winter of 2020. It was January of 2020, and it was like bleak and cold, and the wind was howling, and it was doing that sort of thing it always does on the coast where it's not really raining, but it's not raining, and it's like it was Atlanta, and I stayed in this Airbnb to save money that was way at the end of the boardwalk where there were just like empty lots. And I got to say, man, Atlantic City was one of the, it felt like being in a Ramsey Campbell book. It was just like the bleakest place I'd almost ever been. It was so great. I loved it.
Man, I wish I knew you back then. Do you happen to recall seeing windmills on your way there?
Yeah. Yeah, there was a windmill like restaurant or something right near where I was staying.
That's my well, there's a few windmills that it's one way that they get energy and naturally, and that's on my island.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So I was probably in a neighborhood,
Yeah, Alexa is not a place you want to be at night, man.
Yeah, and that's what really blew my mind about, I grew up in like a tourist town. And so I love that aspect of these tourist places where it's like the carnival looks great as long as you're looking at it from this side. But if you go around to behind the carnival, it's not so good. Don't go there.
Yeah, it's just crazy because you got, such odd connections to organized crime. You got Frank Sinatra and his group, and going back all the way to Al Capone and Nucky Johnson, Nucky Johnson from Boardwalk Empire.
And it was also so weird to me to walk by the Trump Taj Mahal that's still just sitting there empty. It's like this is hundreds of thousands of square foot of like prime real estate on the board. It's like just empty and falling apart. It was so weird.
Yeah.
That's weird. That's sad.
Fuck that guy. Believe it or not, we talk to a lot of artists, and that's the general consensus. Although we have random listeners say that they're not a fan of that view, but when you talk to enough artists, that's usually their view.
Well, it's also so weird to me. Like, I was just doing something with someone in the UK, and they were talking about like regional arts funding, and I was like, it was such an alien set of concepts to wrap my head around. Is like a really active, and a lot of that's come out since the austerity stuff in the UK, but just like the infrastructure so many other countries have to fund writers and artists and all these people doing stuff and put arts in communities and all this stuff, and it's like we have such a tiny, emaciated little version of that here, which is always such a bummer.
Well, Gishig Rice, he's a Canadian native, First Nations, I believe it's proper term, but he wrote this.
Canada,
he wrote this book called Moon of the Crusted Snow. Sequel is supposed to go on next year, but that was actually funded through one of those programs, and that blew my mind because that was the first time I heard of that.
Yeah, no, totally. And when it leads to weird stuff, but it all, like in Canada, you look at government funding of like film and stuff and the tax breaks. And on the one hand, you're dealing with some really boring movies. On the other hand, you get David Cronenberg. So like, you get some good stuff in there.
Absolutely. All right. If you guys want, I want to stay within the time frame that I said I would.
Oh, yeah.
Talk for hours. But
I had a great time. This was great. Thank you all so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
No, God, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I just wanted to run through a few outro questions. If you guys are cool with that. And Grady, I wanted to ask you first, what are you currently reading?
Okay, so it's really embarrassing. Everything I'm currently reading, I'm reading an obstetrics manual from 1967. I'm reading a book that was written in the 90s that's a memoir set in the town in the 60s where my book's going to be set, and I don't want to say what it is. And I'm reading something called Wake Up Little Susie, Unwed Mother's Infant Adoption and Forced Surrender. So I'm reading a lot of fun stuff.
I dive into that stuff with, like I said, I wasn't kidding about Korean War.
Although actually the fun thing I'm reading right now, I'm not sure how it's going to turn out, but I just picked up The Sins of Rachel Ellis. There are 7 doors to hell, one especially for little girls. So I'm looking forward to getting more into this. Yeah. Bride of the Incubus is the tagline.
It's interesting.
I didn't know Incubi married.
Yeah. Once you find a topic that you like, there's like magazines that are free online from the early 1900s and so on, up to modern day, where it's like a radio magazine, but they have ads from that period. So it's one route you can go that's also free, that could help build up that realistic world for historical fiction.
Oh yeah, no.
It's fun.
And I actually just went down and spent like a week at the Historical Society down there reading the newspapers from the year it's set in, and like going through and getting weather reports and what's on television and the ads, and looking at phone books from around there and stuff. So yeah, I love doing that stuff.
Same. I'm a member of my Historic Society, actually. I'm a
good for
dork.
you, man.
I'm a dork with that stuff.
Yeah.
Cina, what are you currently reading?
I am reading Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey.
Nice.
That's what, yeah.
Oh, how is it? It's the new
I'm
one,
enjoying
right?
it. Yeah, it's the new one. So I'm enjoying that one quite a bit. So that's what I am. And then which I hadn't read because I've just been so busy, but Dark Factory by Kathy Koja. So I'm also reading like those two at the same time, which is very different.
Wait, is that a new book, or is that one of her older ones?
That one, Dark Factory, came out this year.
Last year? Okay.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
How is it?
Yeah. I'm enjoying that one. That one's very different. So, I mean, they're two very, very different books, but I mean, it's Kathy Koja, so it's wonderful. So, yeah, I'm enjoying both of those right now. So I'm in between like tons of like research documents, and since I'm The Shoemaker's Magician comes out in February, and that deals with the silent film history of Chicago. So I'm just still digging through a lot of like silent film research and history. So, yeah,
that is awesome.
So those are my books for enjoyment, in addition to all of my research.
Kathy Koja was on here. She did a reading of Dr. Seuss, and that was just like the greatest fucking thing ever. Because we did this thing for a little bit where we first had Cina on for like mini episodes, but they're specifically catered for reading a piece of whatever their own fiction they want, or in Kathy Koja's case, Dr. Seuss, and mix her vocabulary, cursing, and Dr. Seuss together, and it's just wonderful. Brennan, what are you currently reading?
I am currently reading Not Enough, man. I've not picked up a book in several days. I just finished writing probably the second draft, I guess, of the third book in a trilogy. So now I am deep diving back into book 2 to fix all the shit I messed up so that I can get it to the publisher and out in time before I go back to book 3. And essentially it's eating up all my time. It's this is my lunch break at work, and this is, I closed it up about 15 minutes before we got on here, and if I can keep my eyes open, I'm going to jump back on it. But
yikes.
I would like to pick up a book for pleasure again one of these days. Maybe this weekend. Who knows? Patrick, how about you?
Just finished Grady's How to Sell a House today. How to Sell a Haunted House. Blech, can't talk.
Just How to Sell a House.
And I felt it was kind of a neat mixture between, like, it felt like there were influences of Ira Levin and Robert Marasco, and I love Burnt Offerings. And it just, I was telling my wife on our walk today that I was telling her about your book, and I said, this guy just he cuts all the fat out. Like, we talked to plenty of great writers, but like, seriously, you cut all the unnecessary words out, and the way, and tell me if this is crossing any spoilery territories, but when you're talking about flashbacks and you're describing the inner circuitry of how someone thinks,
Mhm.
there's two doorways, I'll just say that,
Oh yeah.
two people and one door closes. I reread that over a few times. I'm like, holy fuck, that's a good way to say it. Or when you're talking about a flashback, there's a table in real time, present day, and then it picks up from the flashback. I'm like, I'm
No,
making mental notes myself because that's
I really
excellent.
appreciate that, because I got to say, as I was doing the copy edits on that book, I reread Rosemary's Baby, and holy
I
cow,
called
man,
it. Yes, I knew it.
So good.
it's so good, and that book
It's
is
so
so
good. Yeah.
fuel efficient. Like, he
Yeah.
does so much with so little. I was
Mm-hmm.
just like, oh my God, I'm a faker. This is all, how could I, you know what I mean? I was just like, this is so, and he's really operating at a higher level as a writer, I think, than a lot of us.
Brendan,
I
what was
just
that?
I
Sorry, go
reread
ahead.
it last I reread it last year, and I was like, it's just so good.
Yeah.
It's so efficient. Yeah.
It is. And it's funny, I read the sequel, Son of Rosemary, and it's so not interesting.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to
Yeah.
wrap your head around the same, like Stepford Wives, I also think is great. And A Kiss Before Dying.
Yes.
It's so hard to wrap your head around the fact that it's the
Absolutely.
same guy. It's like, what
I
happened?
am. Yeah, I don't know.
Brendan, what was that medication? Chuck Palahniuk, we had him on to talk about Rosemary's Baby. We had him on before that, and he talked about Rosemary's Baby a little bit too. And he was saying he was addressing Ira because he talked with Ira Levin. He did like a forward for whatever edition it was.
Yeah.
And he was saying that Ira, I don't think outright said this, but it's Chuck's belief that Ira was writing about what was the medication called, Brian? Do you
I
remember?
want to say thalidomide, but I don't
That's
know if
it,
I'm just
yeah.
thinking of Billy Joel.
No, that
No,
sounds
no,
right.
about thalidomide. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's his belief that it was the commentary on that because he can't outright say this is what the book's about. So it's about a woman with, the son of the devil. And
Right.
it's really like, I read the book before he told us that. And then when he said that, I'm like, that makes complete sense. And that's kind of more fucked up than the son of the devil because we're doing it
Yeah.
to ourselves.
Yeesh.
I'm gonna start reading a new author. This is their debut book, Lore.
Oh,
Man,
Laura, I saw that.
I don't like the
Oh.
glare.
I believe it's Gislason.
Laura Gislason. So it's called Inside Out. I just don't like the glare of. Oh, there it is. I got to do reverse positioning.
It's a freaky cover.
Yeah, it's supposed to be super like interesting body horror, and we're gonna have them on this Monday, this upcoming Monday. It's actually the episode before this one, so it comes out the day of their book release, I think it was. But it seems really neat, and it's coming out through Darklit Publications or Press. I mix those up.
Press.
Yeah, I should have these notes down. I don't, but anyways, they come out with a lot of neat stuff. They just came out with Brendan's book called Noose, a horror western with heavy influences of Batman. Cina, before we go, I would love it if you could talk about your upcoming books.
I have like 3 coming out. Crime
Oh my God.
Scene. I don't know what's going on. People just tell me where to be. Crime Scene from Raw Dog Screaming Press. That's a poetry narrative told in verse.
Loved it. So
13th.
good.
Thank you. And then Loteria, which is a series of Latin American folklore short story coming out from Polis in January. And then The Shoemaker's Magician, which is the second book, and the Chicago Saga, which deals with Chicago silent film history. That's out from Polis in February. It comes out Valentine's Day. So.
Oh, excellent. And then real quick, where can people follow you, Grady and Cina?
All my dumb stuff gets collected at GradyHendrix.com, so it's easy. If you want to avoid me, don't go there.
Cina.
My website's a mess, but it's still there. CinaPelayo.com. It's getting updated, and I'm very active on Twitter. Cina Pelayo. So.
That's Pelayo. And final thoughts. Start with you, Grady. Then Cina, then Brennan.
Final thoughts. I feel like this is the end of the Jerry Springer show. Like, get off.
It has to
Get
be
it.
touching.
Take it together.
Jerry
Man.
always does it at the end. Very sincere.
Exactly. I think we all need to listen to each other more. No, I mean, final thoughts, not really. I mean, I'm really glad you guys liked How to Sell a Haunted House. And, one of the reasons I wrote it is I also wanted to do a traditional haunted house book. It was when you write a book, you live somewhere else for a while. And it was really nice to be living in a narrative that felt comfortable to me for the last year or so. So I hope it's fun for people.
Yeah, man. I'm only saying this because you mentioned the puppets, but seriously, creepy as fuck.
I used to actually, I was going to say, I don't want to ruin anything, but I worked for some time for a socialist puppet collective. So taken from life.
I didn't want to bring them up because I didn't want to be spoilery.
But he said it first.
He said it first. So that's why I was like, I really want to talk about them. I'll grab him at an event and we can just chat about puppets. But How to Sell a Haunted House is out January 17th.
Yes. Thank you.
January 17th. And I absolutely loved it. And my final thoughts is that everyone just be nice to yourselves and nice to each other and pick up How to Sell a Haunted House January 17th.
Absolutely. Brennan, you, sir.
I'm going to echo the kind things that everybody has to say about this book. I think it's awesome. I think there's a lot of really great meditations on grief, and Cina put them earlier a lot more intelligently than I can, but I love the way that you write Mark and Luis kind of going through grief in different ways and trying to kind of understand the way each other one is processing it. You talked earlier about cleaning out the house of a parent, and I think there's just so much depth in the initial approach that each one takes to cleaning out the house and, trying to condemn the other one for the way they're going about it without necessarily trying to understand what that other person is going through. And that's before we even get into the puppets and stuff like that. There's just so much in here. And I think people are really, really going to like it. And thank you for your time, Grady.
Oh yeah, no, dude, thanks for having me. I love doing this.
My final thoughts are pretty much echoing Brennan. Is I truly do love this book. It's I can't wait to buy it. When I said I were 11, I specifically meant Rosemary's Baby, and that's funny that you mentioned that. And man, I can't tell you how happy I am that I got to read it, and we had you on because we've wanted you on for a while. And it's even better that we have to have the time to share with Cina, especially how she's on a deadline. That's crazy. It's an honor to have both of you.
What's your deadline?
Now.
God. Run.
They're like, need this book right now. We need to print the galleys. I'm like, oh, okay. So,
oh my God. Thank you for doing this. Then.
No, this was great. This is what I need this to, that this spiritual gathering of artists and creatives. It helps push the end of the book. It helps. Yeah. That's
awesome. Everyone, next episode 167 is when Michelle Garza and Melissa Larson, Lason, I don't know if I'm saying it right. Lason. They are the Sisters of Horror, the Sisters of Slaughter. I can't talk late at night, apparently. Everybody, you have many choices in podcasts. Thank you for picking us.